Hello, welcome to Patrice's Projects. Today's project is not going to be in the garden. Today we're doing turkey meatloaf, and it's going to be done with ground turkey, some of my fresh herbs that I've grown, so I guess there is a garden component. And I'm going to make it as healthy as possible using low sodium. Now everyone has their own way of saying this, and I like to pronounce it the way it's written. Worcestershire sauce. My husband says it's something like Worcestershire or something like that. Whatever you think it is, try and pronounce it, write it the way you pronounce it down below. I'm interested to know how it's really said. So, okay, let's get going on this. What we're going to need for this recipe is 2 pounds of ground turkey. I like to use the 93%. There is 99%, but it makes your meatloaf pretty dry. And no, my hand is not filthy. I've been working in the garden and it's stained. I was harvesting spinach and lettuce and pulling some weeds, and then the humus in the backyard, when I pulled a few weeds, it really gets embedded in your hand, so that's what that is. I am going to wear gloves when it's time to prepare the food though. You're going to need 2 pounds of ground turkey, 93%, or 85% if you want it more juicy. I like a little bit more lean. You're going to need either fresh or dried rosemary, fresh or dried marjoram. This is spicy clove basil. You can use regular basil. What I'm going to do is probably a combination of spicy clove, because that is a little bit stronger, and I don't have any regular basil right now fresh, so I'm going to use a little bit of dried. And I also am going to use a little bit of oregano, and my thyme. Unfortunately, it's time to buy more thyme. I'm going to use what I have left here, and that will be almost enough. And you're going to need some onion. I'm going to use red onion. You can use either kind. Oftentimes I do use the yellow onion, only because the red, when it's cooked into it, gives kind of a funky color. But I don't have a yellow onion right now. That's what I have. Let's see, you're going to need some chopped garlic. I like to use the jar because it's just a lot easier and it tastes fine. And you're going to need some Worcestershire sauce. I'm using the reduced sodium. You can use regular. You're also going to need 3 eggs, and you're going to need breadcrumbs. I like to use the garlic and herb just because it adds a little bit more flavor to it. The regular breadcrumbs would be better for us because we were shooting for better for us. You can also make your own breadcrumbs and use that. That would be fine too. Just add a little bit more on the herbs, and it'll be just fine that way. I just haven't gotten around to doing that, so I'm going to use my garlic and herb breadcrumbs. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to separate the herbs from the stems. And I've already gone through and picked off all the bad leaves, like this one here. I would pick off. I don't know if you can see that very well. My lighting should be on the other side. But I just go through and I pick off all the little leaves off of the stems. So the way I do this, I'm sorry, I wasn't even thinking, I was just doing. On the little ends, I just take my nail and I pinch off, and that's why I'm not wearing gloves yet, because I need to use my nails on this part, and that's why my hands look like they do. And it's okay to get the soft little stem parts in there, just not this hard middle piece. So like this little, oh, it fell apart. The little, they're like this, okay. Where it's got this little group of tiny little leaves together. That's fine because that's all soft and it doesn't matter. It can go in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take these off of these stems and figure out how much I want. I'm not going to use all of these. That's going to be a little excessive, I think, because rosemary is stronger and it would overpower the meatloaf. And on these, the spicy clove, I'm probably going to use about that much. So probably if you're using regular basil, I would say that's equivalent to maybe 4 big leaves, because this does have a stronger flavor. And if actually you'd probably want more than that, you'd probably want 5, because I'm also going to add just a touch of the regular basil. And to remove these from their stems, the marjoram, I just slide it right off like that. These have a really soft stem. These have been grown in the house, so the stems are really soft. I could even use the stems, but I'm not going to. And I have some other marjoram that I grow outside, and those have a much stiffer stem. So yeah, I'm just going to finish up doing this, and then I'll show you how much I end up with, and then we'll go ahead and chop it all up. Okay, I've got them all picked off the stems, and then what I do is I'll cut those two together. Oh, what this ended up being is about the equivalent of probably 2 of those sprigs at the grocery store, full of leaves, something like that. And I decided to go with, and I was thinking about this, depending on what a large leaf is. Because I remember last year I had some basil plants, and I had some really big leaves. So I'm thinking, you know, it may be the equivalent of 3 or 4 leaves about that size, or maybe 6 or 7 leaves about that size. So, and it's up to your taste too. I like a lot of basil in things. And the rosemary ended up probably maybe a sprig and a half. And that is probably a little more than I need, but my kids like it, so, and my husband loves rosemary. So we're going with that. And with the rosemary, when you do cut it up, what I like to do, because it will shoot around the house, and so when you're cutting it, cover it with your hand, especially in the beginning when you have the larger pieces. So sorry I'm hiding it from view, but I just want it all to stay where I have it on the board. So, and then you scoop it all back together and start again. And after you get it somewhat small, then I'm going to go ahead and, well, these leaves are a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and chop through these a couple of times. And then just scoop everything together and cut it all together. And that'll also help the rosemary from shooting all over the place. And then once you get it cut up nice and small, then you set it aside and cut up the onion. I guess with this size of a board, that's all I'm cutting up, so I'll just leave them on the same board. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention was tomato sauce and brown sugar for the top. We like to do, some people do like ketchup or something on the top. I like it to have that little bit of sweetness to it, so I do. And I'm also using the no salt added. Oh, sorry, wrong way. The no salt added. This lighting is totally at the wrong place. Okay, that's a little bit better. This is the no salt added tomato sauce. I got a generic brand, so it doesn't really matter. It's just going to be the topping. And if you couldn't see earlier, because of the lighting, this is the chopped garlic. I like this better than crushed. Especially if I'm using it on like garlic bread or something, because you have the little chunks in there, but they're not gigantic, especially with this brand. So let's go ahead and get the onion. And I'm going to cut, this will be about probably half a cup of onions diced. What do you think that is? A little more than half a cup. Maybe 2/3. Okay. Alright, so from here it's just a matter of mixing everything together. So I'm going to start with my seasonings because I want to see how much of the dried seasonings I'm putting. So this is the oregano, and I don't usually measure anything, so I'm going to try and figure out what I'm putting here. I would say that's almost a teaspoon, so about 3/4 of a teaspoon. And this is the dry basil. And if you're just using dry basil, I would put like 1.5 teaspoons because it's more mild than some of the others. But because I'm also using the other spicy clove basil, I'm only putting maybe not quite half a teaspoon, or about half maybe, a teaspoon. And that's just because the two basils differ in flavor, and if I had a choice I would have put more of the basil, fresh basil, regular, instead of the spicy clove, because I just like the way it tastes in meatloaf, but I have the spicy cloves, that's what I use. And all I have left in here is a little over 1/4 teaspoon probably, maybe 1/4. But normally I would use about the same as I do the oregano, or maybe even a touch more. So I'd do about 3/4 of a teaspoon or a whole teaspoon of thyme. And then we're just going to go ahead and dump all this. Okay, I was going to grab a tablespoon, and then I realized a tablespoon it won't quite do it. So I grabbed myself a 1/4 cup, and this might even be a little bit less than what I normally use, but this is a little bit less of an amount than I normally make. So that's almost a 1/4 cup. Let's see if it looks right to me. Let's make it the whole 1/4 cup worth. It's so much harder when you're trying to measure things and figure out what the measurements are. Let me move that around just a little bit. Let's say it's a 1/3 cup. That's about right there. Okay, and then we'll put our eggs right into it. No reason to scramble them first because they get mixed right in. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and pour all that I have in here, which is almost 1 cup. And I have Italian breadcrumbs. I thought I had a spare of this too. It seems today is one of those days where I'm just going to run out of everything. And I'm going to put most of it in there. I'm going to keep out a 1/4 cup. And mix it in and see what the texture is. And it also depends on how lean your turkey is and such, and what brand, because some brands seem to be more soggy than others. So it looks like I'm going to need the whole cup at least, because see, that's a little bit more slimy than it should be. Okay, it looks like I am going to need, I'm just going to put the whole cup in. I probably don't need the entire full cup, but so close that might as well make it the whole thing. and it's not going to hurt it any. Okay, and we're all mixed up, and I'm going to go ahead and put this separate it into 2 loaf pans, and pop it in the oven at 350. Okay, this is kind of funny. I have 2 really old small loaf pans that look terrible. They're all stained. And I have 1 fairly large loaf pan. What you should have is 2 mediums. Not sure what the sizing is on these. If it even says. This one says it's a 2-quart. And this one doesn't say anything. But it's about half the size. If there is a size in between these, that would be perfect. If not, a small and a large work. You could use 2 larges and just make them a little more shallow. Because this is turkey, I do spray because it doesn't have all the fat of beef. So I do spray it with cooking spray. I used the buttered one just now. You can use whatever kind you want. I started using the buttered kind because the family likes the smell of it when I'm cooking. It's so funny. It's like, oh, Mom, that smells so good. Well, I haven't cooked yet. So, I don't like to make them real thick because I don't like it to get all hard on the edges. Oh, I could have used both small ones. I'm used to having a little bit more meat than this. Oh, there's no glove there. So, yeah, what I was saying is I don't like it to be all hard and blackened kind of on the edges. Let's even that up a little bit. And not cooked in the middle. So if you make them nice and thin, I guess this is about right. I'm going halfway up the pan, and that's it. So yeah, if there's a like 1.5 quart pan, that's good. And the way I do this, well, that one is a little bit more than halfway up, but because it's a smaller pan, I do tend to fill this one a little higher, because it's going to cook more evenly all the way around than something that's bigger. It takes longer for it to evenly cook, so I go ahead and put more in this one usually, but maybe not that much more. Okay, that should be about right. And then what I do, after I push it down, and notice I'm pushing it more in the middle than I am on the sides. I like it to come up a little bit on the sides because just like a cake, when these cook, the middle it tends to expand up as the sides are going down. So I compensate for that in the beginning, and I push it, make the edges up a little bit higher than the center, and then in order for it to properly hold the sauce later after it's almost all the way cooked, actually when it is all the way cooked, then I go ahead and put the sauce on with the brown sugar mixed into it. And so what I like to do to help it to hold that sauce a little bit better, I take my fingers and I make little holes into it prior to cooking. And they're not real deep, but they're not real shallow, because they'll start to fill in as it's cooking too. So oftentimes I won't see my finger holes hardly, but it does seem to help to hold the sauce in place. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put these in the oven at 350, and I'm going to cook them for approximately 45 minutes, and then I'm going to take a look and make sure it's at the right level of cooking. And they will build up that icky looking white stuff around the edges that chicken and turkey does, but that gets hidden with the sauce, so no worries there. Okay, I'm going to put these in the oven, and I'll be back. As soon as I put these in the oven, and opened my can up to make the sauce for the top, and I was getting ready to turn the camera back on, I realized I didn't even put my garlic. So I yanked them back out, and they're still nice and cold, so it is not too late. So, yeah, I'm going to use my right hand. Thankfully, I did not completely forget. It would have been fine, but we're used to garlic in it, and we like garlic, so I probably want to wipe these down before I put the meat back in. So sorry about that. That was a I've made a mistake. You know, Julia Child's moment there. So, that was about a teaspoon that was left in here. And I like to use about a teaspoon per maybe a little more than a teaspoon per. That's at least a tablespoon. If not a little bit more. Go ahead and come in. Yes, it's on. We're all mixed in. Some will probably end up with like a big bite of garlic. Okay. Good enough. Okay, let's spray again. I'm just spraying a little bit. You don't need it heavy on there. There is some fat in this, so it won't stick. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat what I did earlier and put it in the oven, and I'll be right back. Okay, while we're waiting for our meatloaf to finish cooking, I'm going to go ahead and mix up the sauce for the top. And I use light brown sugar. You can use either one. Light brown is nice because it doesn't overpower the meatloaf. Let's see, there was something. So you use the entire can, and that's a 8-ounce can. I'm going to go ahead and put a 1/4 cup, semi-packed, of brown sugar. Normally I don't measure, but I think that would be about what I would normally use. It's sweet, but it's not too sweet, you know. So that is semi-packed, but not all the way. It's not super loose. And it's also not quite all the way to the top, because I realized as I was putting it in there, that seems like quite a lot. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle it on just to make sure that I'm not overdoing. Oh, that would have been too much. So I'm using a little more than half of that. So that was 3 tablespoons loose, probably. That looks right. And then it'll put just a little bit of color in there too. And you can adjust it up or down as you like it. Maybe you like it with no brown sugar at all. That would be fine as well. You don't have to use brown sugar. You could, if you don't like the flavor of brown sugar, you could use regular white sugar if you wanted a little bit sweetened. Or use an artificial sweetener, or like stevia or something like that. So when the meatloaf is done, then we'll go ahead and put this on there, and then we'll cook it another 10 minutes. So actually is when it's just about there. Then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, I had them in 35 minutes, and it looked fine to me. See how the edges are just lightly brown, and it looks a little bit dry. And remember I mentioned the white gooey stuff that accumulates on top? That gets hidden by the sauce. So what I'm going to do, you can see the liquid on top. I pour it off into a can and then toss it away.
And there won't be very much because it's turkey. With beef, it's quite a bit. And with beef I use 85% so that it's nice and juicy inside. And when it's at this level of doneness, almost all the fat will have accumulated around the edges, and then you just pour it off. You'll also have a big gap around the edges if it's beef. And pouring it off isn't as easy as with turkey. Turkey just stays in place. Beef wants to fall out on you. So it's a little bit more difficult to pour off, and I'm just pouring. I'm not holding it down or anything. I'm just pouring it right into the little can. And I like to wipe the edges off so that it doesn't stain my pans any more than they already are. Makes cleanup a little easier. Is that the edge I used? I think so. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about is you can add also mushrooms, and you can add bell peppers if you like them. My family hates them except for me, so I don't add those. Once in a while I will add mushrooms if I have a few on hand. I would only put, like, with this amount, maybe 4 or 5 pretty big ones. At the most 5. I mean, that's a lot. But mushrooms will incorporate into the meat mixture easier than the onions. The onions, if you put any more than I did, just with this recipe, then you'll end up having it fall apart on you because they keep their shape in the mixture until it's all the way cooked, and then they start to shrink and such, and then you have all these little gaps in there. So I wouldn't put any more onion or bell pepper. If you're going to put bell pepper, put less onion so that you don't have meatloaf that falls apart on you. And it's easier also to shape it into your pans that way. Okay, what I'm doing is trying to get an even amount on both of them, spread it evenly all over. Oh, and I did end up adding another teaspoon. I tasted it, and with this no sodium off-brand, normally I only buy on-brand, but I saw no sodium on this, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a great idea. I remember now why I don't buy off-brand. It just doesn't have the flavor that like Del Monte or something like that would have. So I added an extra teaspoon, and now it's fine. Okay, I'm going to put it back in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes, and then when it looks like it's beginning to actually cook, you may see a touch of browning sometimes on it, then you're done. While I was cooking the meatloaf, I went ahead and peeled some potatoes. I peeled 4 potatoes and cut them up, and they just finished boiling. When you're boiling your potatoes, you want to cut them pretty thin, and you boil them until they break apart easily, but they don't decompose inside the pan. These are about right because I don't like them real firm. I have a bad wrist, and it's hard for me to mash them. So this is something that I'm trying for the first time today. It's called Savory unsalted margarine, and there's no cholesterol in this. So we're going to see how that goes. It's supposed to... it looks like it is much better for my husband than the other margarine, and definitely better than even unsalted butter, because when he had his heart attack it was a cholesterol related issue. He doesn't have high blood pressure, and the doctor still has him on blood pressure medication because that was only 6 months ago that he had his heart attack. Actually 6 months ago, a few days ago. So I'm going to add, this is 4 medium to small potatoes, smallish, about a tablespoon per potato. So that's a 1/4 cup right there. And then I should have bought the low-fat sour cream, but instead of using milk, we like sour cream in it, so I'm going to add About 3 like that. That looks just right. Okay. This tomato sauce didn't brown as it sometimes does, but you see it's a little more stuck on there, a little drier. So those are done. There you have it. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Thank you very much for joining me in my kitchen. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you will try it. And if you have something that maybe would make my meatloaf even better, put it in the comments down below. If you like the video, please click like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that. And enjoy your food. Talk to you soon. Bye.